Hi, this is Jeff Cotterman, and this is the first of some TriSystem educational videos that we're going to be doing about some groundbreaking things. I'm here with Dr. Brian Lenskes, and he gave me a phone call, I think it was about a week ago, and it was what I call a Damascus moment. After this phone call, I started to really rethink what I've been doing for the last 27 years, and that has to do with sports nutrition and nutrition planning with people, and the whole idea of the high carbohydrate road to heaven. And I guess that's not the only way to get there. You want to tell me a little bit more about your findings?
Yeah, I think weight has always been an issue for me. I've always struggled, and I even worked out with you for quite some time. And
right, you were
it was
a client.
struggle, working out hard twice a day, watching the calories, and so I've been really looking into paleo diets, cutting out the processed foods, things along those lines, and I was still plateaued out, and I wasn't losing weight. I went on a medical trip to Guatemala in January to February this year, actually, and I got back, and I had gained weight, and I was frustrated. My clothes weren't fitting right. I think, this is crazy, right? I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I'm eating 6 times a day, small meals, snacks here and there, never skipping breakfast. If you skip breakfast, you're going to die of starvation. So, I started, in my research, started looking into to what the underlying pathology was. Why is it that some people just can't lose weight? And most of my overweight people say, I hardly eat anything and I can't lose weight. But this skinny girl eats everything and she never gains weight, right? So you think, how can that possibly be? So I watched a video by a doctor from Canada named Jason Fung. It's on YouTube called Intermittent Fasting for Weight Loss. And I was just thinking, this guy's probably a quack. I'm just going to look at it and see what he said. And the more he talked, the more I said, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. This is what I see on my medical trips. This is what I see in my practice. What he was getting at is the underlying pathology is insulin resistance, right? As us docs see more diabetes, more obesity, more cancer, more problems, we wonder why this is happening and why with our medical technology we're not helping more people, and we're seeing people get worse and worse and worse. So our standard of care is when someone comes in with diabetes, or by definition their A1C, 3-month sugar average over 6.5, we look at them and we say, well, let's put you on meds. We got to put you on meds to make sure that we bring those sugars down, because we're looking at the sugars and worry about that, as anyone with diabetes knows. So Jason Fung was talking about most of these people have high insulin levels, not low, right? So we're giving them insulin and they already have high insulin levels. So it doesn't make sense. It's just like if you came to me and said, I'm drinking 10 beers a day and I can't get drunk, what do I have to do? And I said, well, Jeff, then you have to drink 12 beers, 14. Just keep going up and up until you get the effect you want. Mm-hmm. Rather than saying, maybe you need to step back and stop drinking for a week or two. Mm-hmm. Then you go out on your cheaper date, you have 1 or 2 beers at the football game and save $300, right?
Right.
So that was the concept, and most of us in Western medicine don't get that concept of saying, oh, they're making insulin, but their body is not sensitive to it anymore. And so why are they insensitive to insulin? Because we're telling them to eat 6 times a day, right? Make sure you carb load if you're going to work out. You got to have, Gatorade, and so when you look at the data, it's really interesting, because a lot of the doctors who study obesity and diabetes, the #1 correlation is sugary drinks, right? Mm-hmm. So when you get that fast stimulus of sugar, so I have guys who are drinking 6 or 7 Cokes a day, right? Mm-hmm. And they weigh 300 pounds. They give up the Cokes, they lose 40 or 50 pounds instantly.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, from a sports nutrition standpoint, and from my standpoint, over the last 27 years, a good percentage, the majority of my clientele responded to frequent meals and resistance training, cardiovascular training, flexibility training. So we've increased through exercise their carb stores, their glycogen storage capability.
Correct, yeah.
And I think that for a good percentage of the population, that's enough to increase insulin sensitivity. But then there's, like your case, you were my client. We have clients in my church. We have obese clientele, and that doesn't apply. And we would just up the intensity, increase the calorie deficit, mm-hmm. make them train more than once a day, and we were pushing them. We were putting a megaphone to their ear, yeah, like they were deaf. Yeah, yeah. Their body just wasn't responding to it.
And when you look at you look at your patients, you look at people who go on some of the diet programs where it's a liquid diet, right? They'll lose weight, but you look at them at 1 year, 90% of them have failed.
Yeah.
Some other diet plans where it's calorie restriction, 90% fail. So do these guys just get lazy, right? They go, I'm not going to do it for 6 months or a year, and then I'm done, and I'm just going to gain all my weight back. Mm-hmm. The problem is they never fix the underlying physiology of insulin resistance. Like you said, probably 1/3 of people in the United States are insulin sensitive. They can have their chocolate cake every day, they can have donuts, they're going to do their thing and they're okay. But as they get older, they get more and more insulin resistance, right? So my brother has always been the skinny rail guy his whole life, you know, and all of a sudden the last 4 or 5 years he gained a bunch of weight. Now he's type 2 diabetic. Yeah, his A1C was 8, you know, 6.5 is diabetic. So he's like, holy cow, right? What do I do? So what's happened is he made himself, I said, don't worry, man, we'll get you under control. So we started working together, and I said, look, you have to cut your carbs, right? As soon as you cut your carbs, you're making less insulin. The less insulin you're making, the more sensitive your body becomes to insulin, right? So you need less to get the same effect. It's like if someone nags you all the time, you tune them out and don't listen anymore, right? But if you have a friend who's quiet and calm and they start blowing up, you think, holy cow, you start listening more. It's the same thing. Our body, anything we do, we get resistant. If you drink too much, you get resistance to that. You take too many pain meds, you get resistance to that. You need more and more to get the same effects, right? Insulin is the same way. So the more sensitive we make our body to insulin, the easier it's going to be to lose weight. The more, you know, the better you're going to do in activities. You know, your energy level gets better. Right. Everything gets better by lowering our insulin to where it should be. But by eating 6 times a day is not natural. If you look at the history of man, you know, the farmers weren't out saying, oh, it's been an hour, we got to eat something, let's stop. Turn off the tractor. Let's, you know, I mean, it's just not natural what we're doing now.
I think we both want to make people healthy, but I'm a sports nutritionist in your position, and obviously people come to you and there's some kind of medical symptom, there's some kind of specific condition that they're trying to correct, right? But when people come to me, yes, we want to prevent sickness and illness, but it's outside of scope for me to treat specific sickness. So when people come to me, let's address. We're talking about a radical thing here. We're talking about going against the paradigm of eating more frequently is always better. Eating higher carbohydrate is always better. The National Association of Sports Nutrition, their stance was we want to move everyone to a higher carbohydrate diet. Everyone, it was universal. Now that stance is changing. So people watching this are going to say, well, what about muscle glycogen depletion? What about performance? How is, I understand that there's a medical reason for fasting, and there's a medical reason to even go high fat. But aren't my athletes or my clients that are just looking to gain muscle and lose fat, aren't they going to raise their cholesterol? Isn't there LDL? Isn't the mechanism for heart disease an increase in LDL?
Yeah, it's a controversial topic, you know. There's a lot of people that support a ketogenic diet, and you look at it, your LDL may go up a bit, but your HDL goes up exponentially, which is a protective factor. A lot of us now are looking at the ratio between HDL, LDL, triglycerides, all that stuff, and I've seen in my practice, I've had guys come in, one of my patients, as a matter of fact, one of the first times I started looking at this, he came in and said, are you going to fire me too? And I said, what do you mean? He said, my cardiologist fired me. And I know the cardiologist, and he's a great guy. And I said, why did he fire you? And he said, because I won't go on a statin drug. And I said, well, you have 5 stents in. Your LDL cholesterol has never been less than 190. You know, we want you less than 100 for sure. And some people would argue 70, right?
That's just LDL. That's not.
That's just LDL cholesterol we're talking about, right? So he comes in and he said, well, I went on I changed my diet so it's going to be better. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm eating more vegetables and fruit, things like that. And I said, oh, that's good. I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make. He said, yeah, but I also eat bacon and hamburger and steaks and things like that. I said, you got it. You think it's going to lower your cholesterol doing that? There's no way that's going to happen. He said, well, I think it will. He said, I've lost 14 pounds. I've stopped drinking at night. I cut out all my carbs. I'm not eating processed foods anymore. I said, well, I don't know how. Obviously the cholesterol is coming from the steak and the hamburger and all that stuff you eat. So he comes back and his LDL cholesterol is 112. He's never been lower than 192 since I've known him. And he has stats. He has secondary disease. He's not a
eating saturated fat, eating red meat.
Yeah, and he dropped it, and his triglycerides dropped down to normal. And I said, no, that's a fluke. So I called him the next day. I said, you're pulling my leg because he's kind of a joker. Guy, so you're taking a statin, aren't you? He said, no, I'm not. So I went around with all of his labs and showed all my partners, and they all said, oh, he's on 80 milligrams of Lipitor. It's got to be. And I said, he's not on a statin drug, and he dropped it with diet. And this is the diet he's doing. He cut out processed foods, right? Crazy stuff. Right?
I mean, my own wife was worried about, high cholesterol runs in your family, high LDL, low HDL runs in your family, and now you're going to eat more red meat.
Of course, yeah, and of course, as a primary care doc, I have to look at the outcome, right? if you lose a bunch of weight and I give you a drug to lose weight, then you have a heart attack because the drug I gave you, right? That's not really helpful to you, right?
Right.
And I'm going to be in court.
Right.
The standard of care in medical school, we don't have much nutritional training, right? All we know is low fat because fat's killing you, right? And so we don't.
American
really
Heart
talk about,
Association stance.
Yeah, American Heart Association. You look at the American Diabetes Association. All these guys, you know, they're saying, hey, look, low fat, because we have it backwards. Because we look at it this way: if someone comes in who's diabetic, we say, okay, they're diabetic because they're fat. You gained weight, now you're type 2. Not type 1 is different, obviously, which is autoimmune, where you knock off your insulin.
Which comes first, the chicken or the egg?
So now I've seen the chicken
other?
or the egg, because this. I have 7 people in my practice, 7 guys in particular, who have that weigh less than 170 pounds, that have type 2 diabetes. How could they possibly have type 2 diabetes? And I had to wrestle with this. One of my guys is a ranger at the Mission Trails Park. I see him out there all the time. He hikes 8 hours at a time. He's at the Grand Canyon leading expeditions. This guy weighs 166 pounds, right? I get his numbers back and I look, I said, this is nuts, can't be, right? So his A1C is 10.2, well within the diabetic range. And so I called the lab and said, I think you guys made a mistake, can't be the same guy. This guy's fit, he hikes 8 hours a day, he's doing all this stuff. So I called my patient, I said, hey, and he has a history of coronary disease, which is something else we'll talk about. So he says, oh, doc, I got to make some changes. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, yeah, I ate a lot of sugar. I said, really, what do you eat? I have bacon and eggs for breakfast every day because I'm going for a hike across the Grand Canyon for 8 hours. I got to have carb load, right? So he carb loads. He has a Mountain Dew, he has orange juice for breakfast, he does all this stuff because weight's not an issue. He's not worried about the weight because he's burning off those calories, right? Because a calorie is what we tell people, but a calorie is not a calorie, right? There's a difference.
Right.
So at lunch, he'll take a bunch of trail mix with him with nuts and seeds and also M&Ms and raisins and everything else in there, and 2 Snickers bars because it's easy to carry. Then he gets home, goes out for pasta with his wife, they have a good. Weight's been stable for the last 10 years, right? Type 2 diabetic. So I called him, he said, okay, that's it, doc, I'm done with Mountain Dew, I'm done with all this stuff, right? Comes back, his A1C goes from in the 10 range down to 6. And ever since it's been in the 5. He's been out of the diabetic range with dietary change alone.
So this is a guy with normal weight and who's active and had this underlying kind of time bomb sitting.
Yeah, and that's what, and this ties into another thing I learned since then. There's a Dr. Kraft who was a pathologist who did autopsies on people forever, right? For 60 years he practiced. He said, I've correlated, I've looked at all the data, I've looked at LDL, I've looked at this, he looks at all these data points, and he says, the only correlation is insulin levels. So, diabetic, pre-diabetic, or the doctor missed the diagnosis, right? This guy that had the heart disease when he weighs 160 pounds, right? Insulin resistant, right? Other people I went back, insulin resistant. So this doctor sent a book out to every medical center in the United States, not one person called him back. Right? So it's because it goes against the grain. It's the opposite of what we're saying, because we're so focused, sometimes we're so focused on LDL cholesterol that we miss the big picture, right? So it does play a factor, obviously, and the Framingham study is one of the bigger studies we use for heart disease. The guy who ran that study later in life came out and said, you know, if your LDL is less than 200, probably makes no difference. Pretty wild for us saying, okay, we got to keep you know, we want to lower it down and more and more. The other factor was there's other studies that they did where we're looking at overall mortality, and it's intriguing when you start looking at the actual data. They did a study of 450,000 people admitted to the hospital for a heart attack. Of those people, only 25% were over our goal. So 75% were at goal and they had a heart attack with LDL cholesterol. The average was 104 of LDL, which is well within, you know, most of us, we went less than 130. Because these guys haven't had an event before.
It's not a good measurement of risk.
So it's either not a good measurement of risk or it's not the only measurement of risk. Right? So I think that's what we start looking at. And so that being said, so I look at this guy, and then I have this guy who you know named Chuck. He's over 450 pounds, right? The guy's a disaster. You look at him and say, this guy's a disaster. He's close to death. He can't walk, he can't exercise, he can't do stuff. So I said, you know, I really feel called to help this guy. Knowing what I know now, this guy needs help. And he worked out with you also, right?
Yes, his client.
So, and he was
got him to lose 30 pounds.
30 pounds.
But that was it. The guy needs to lose 200 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at him and you think, okay, this guy's labs are going to be bad. And I said, when's the last time you had labs drawn? 5 years. So in my head, I was like, this guy's got type 2 diabetes, he's insulin resistant, he's got all these problems, his cholesterol is going to be through the roof. And I'm going to be the genius because I'm going to be able to show this guy had terrible numbers, now look how perfect we made him.
No, but wait a minute.
So I get his labs
I
back,
heard this.
his LDL is totally normal.
Yeah.
His 3-month sugar average is better than mine, right? His cholesterol is better, everything's better than mine, but his insulin level's high. Right? His insulin level is 40. We should have it less than 5, ideally
Yes.
less than 3. So he's insulin resistant. So what this tells me is, in 5 years, 3 years, 6 months, 1 year, this guy's going to be diabetic because your body cannot maintain making this much insulin.
Mm-hmm.
So when we hear about carb loading, we start stepping back. There's also a world-class athlete, I just saw a video on him, and he was carb loading all the time. And he's training hard, and all he did was eat carbs. He went to his doctor and said, you're type 2 diabetic, or you're on the verge of, you're 6.4 or 6.5 is diabetic. He said, how can this be? I have no body fat, I'm working out now. So the point is, it's not that we get fat, that we get diabetes, right? The point is, we get insulin resistant, then we get fat. Right. Mm-hmm. So the American Diabetes Association, a lot of these nutritional people are saying, okay, they have diabetes because they're fat, let's make them skinny and their diabetes is going to go away. So the first thing we do is say, okay, now we're going to put you have to eat carbs, right? If you're allergic to peanuts, I don't say, hey, just eat less peanuts. I say, don't eat peanuts, right? So I have a type 2 diabetic came in. This guy, it just happens to be, was 151 pounds, right? He dropped down to 147 after we worked with him for the last 4 months. So he was already pretty fit and thin. Mm-hmm. But he's eating tons of sugar, fruit juice, all this kind of stuff. A1C, 12.3. Disaster, right? He's on death's door with this kind of insulin. Any doctor, including myself, said, you got to go on insulin until we figure this out. So I put him on insulin for 3 days, and I got it back a test that said he was making his own insulin still, right? So he said, that's it, doc. I'm serious. I'm cutting out carbs. I don't want to go on all these crazy meds. I'm going to do this. And he has a liver disease, so he can't take metformin and things that we give to make people more sensitive to insulin to lower that level down. 4 months later, his A1C is 6.2 with no medicine. He was only on insulin for a couple days. It's unheard of. I showed to all my partners, every single one said he's got to be on 80 units of insulin a day. It's impossible. He did it solely through diet and cutting carbohydrates.
That's wonderful. Right? That's wonderful.
So there's more to this story, and I think we have to look at all those things. You want to have a healthy, active lifestyle.
With this video, I want to just overcome 2 major objections to it, and one is carb depletion for athletes. If I cut my carbs out, my muscles are going to be flat. I'm going to be glycogen depleted. I want to address that, and then the other one is, and this is from one of our TriSystem team. What about nutrient deficiency? If you combine intermittent fasting with a ketogenic diet, you're just eating mostly fat. How are you going to get all your water-soluble vitamins, your electrolytes in? How are you going to do that? So glycogen depletion.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Glycogen, that's what I worried about. When I first started going on this diet, I'm a doctor, I can't be, and I believe in intermittent fasting. Dr.
Your brain functions on carbs.
Yeah, you got 80% of your brain function comes from carbohydrate, right? So that's always the argument, saying, well, heck, if you don't eat sugar, you're going to be in a brain fog, you're going to be walking around and confused. 80% of your brain's function can be run on ketones. So if you're on a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, your body is not dumb enough not to be able, it's got to keep your brain going. The first thing it's going to do is keep those ketones up, right? So ketones are giving 80, well, what about the other 20%? If you're taking in 0 carbs, where does that sugar come from, right? Well, where the sugar comes from is gluconeogenesis. Your liver makes sugar from fat that's sitting there. And that's the fat, the bad, dangerous fat that's around our organs, right? So
this is profound. This is something I learned just today.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I had to think about it too. For me, I was thinking, if I cut my carbs out, I'm going to get into trouble. I'm going to be fatigued, tired out, and all that kind of stuff. Like Jason Fung says, hey, if food's giving you all this energy, how come we have a food coma after lunch, right? How come at the end of Thanksgiving we're all tired on the couch with a remote control? We're exhausted. So from a survival benefit, you look at it, it doesn't make sense. If you're a caveman, you go out and you kill a deer and you eat it, right? You eat all that deer and then you're tired and you go to sleep. Next day you wake up, you say, I got to eat again, right? So you have to go out and hunt for a few days. What survival benefit would it possibly be to be fatigued, tired, you can't think when you got to go track something down? That's when you need it the most. So when you look at the data, your metabolism actually goes up at least 2 days into fasting, 1 or 2 days, higher than it was before you fasted. So by us telling people, hey, if you skip one meal, you're going to shut your metabolism and go into starvation mode, it doesn't make sense, right? And then the other thing that's always going to come up is, okay, you're going to burn all your muscle away and then you're going to waste away to nothing. Like bears, when they go hibernate, when they come out, their fat's gone and their skin's loose, but they can still walk and they can still do it. They haven't burned all their muscle. survival benefit would that be, right? So it's like if you're chopping firewood all summer because you know winter's coming, right? You just store up all this firewood, your house is full of firewood, and then it starts getting cold. And you say, oh, I got all this firewood here, but I'm going to burn the table, chairs, I'm going to burn all the stuff I need. What?
Why burn muscle, right?
Why would you burn muscle? And you have fat for a storage. We don't have it here for looks. We have it here for a purpose, right? So our body's trying to preserve itself. So when we get morbidly obese, the problem is the reason we're not tapping into that is we're eating 6 times a day. Why does your body need to tap into it? This is an emergency supply, right? You always have a supply coming. So the gluconeogenesis, when we put it this way, our body can hold 1 teaspoon of sugar, right, in our whole entire bloodstream. So we go out and we drink a Mountain Dew and a Coke and what do we do with all that extra sugar, right? You call insulin. Insulin comes to get the sugar out of the bloodstream. Where do you put it, right? Where would you put the sugar first? If you were designing, where would you put the sugar first?
In my muscle?
Yeah, glycogen stores, right? But you haven't worked out today. You've already eaten 6 times. Your glycogen stores are topped off. Now what? It goes in your liver. So now we have fatty liver disease, which is killing a lot of people. That leads to the insulin resistance. This leads to the problem we're talking about. This is why it's so important, right? Because we're avoiding fat because we're afraid of fat, and all our sugar is being stored as fat around our liver and organs and all the worst areas. And now we have insulin resistance, we have metabolic syndrome, we have all these problems. We all know through our medical studies is that people with central obesity, meaning the guy with a fat belly, skinny arms and legs, is at a huge risk, way more than this 450-pound guy, believe it or not, because he's distributing his fat normally where it should be, all through his body. When you strip it all in the middle and you have this big hard gut and they go, oh, look, I don't have any fat, look, it's hard. That's bad. That means you're at a severe risk, right? Yeah, because you have fat stored around your liver, you have the visceral fat, which is extremely dangerous. So what we do is if we could store that sugar as fat around our liver, when our body needs it, it says, oh, I have a source here. Let me just turn that fat back into sugar. It's called gluconeogenesis. Your liver,
the reverse.
It reverses and starts making that so that you keep your sugar levels normal.
Very interesting.
The big thing, when like this guy Chuck, he's a miracle, and it blows me away every day when I talk to this guy because he's 450 pounds. When I first talked to him, he said, Doc, I can't fast for more than 2 hours. If I start getting shaky and nervous and I get all this stuff, I get hypoglycemia, right? You have that much weight floating around, you have all this energy source, how can you be having hypoglycemia, right? The problem is when your insulin's super high, insulin wants to make you store fat. So once you lower that insulin level down, your body can now see that fat and start using it as an energy source. So at some point on the ketogenic diet, this is why intermittent fasting and ketogenic diet go together, because when you're fasting, when you're eating a high-fat diet, when you don't have a cheeseburger coming in, your body says, no problem, I'll just use this fat here. Why do I need the cheeseburger? I have an energy source, so I'm okay. So within 2 days of doing a ketogenic diet, Chuck is able to fast for 2 days straight. Right? He just finished a 2-week fast. 2 weeks of bone broth, green tea, coffee, things like that, with no ill effects. His mental, I know people who know him, they're like, this guy is through the roof. Energy-wise, he's doing stuff, he's walking around, he's going to shopping with his wife, he's doing things again. His life is coming back, right? So this fear of and the other thing that convinced me a lot is I ran into a friend of mine who I'm actually giving a talk with in January. He's an ultra-marathon runner. So he looks at me and goes, Brian, you lost some weight. I said, I'm about 25 pounds down. He goes, what are you doing? I said, I'm low carb. He's like, you've always been low carb. What else are you doing? And I go, doing a little intermittent fast. Oh, at first I said, I'm low carb and I'm working out more, right? He goes, you've always worked out a lot, And he goes, what else are you doing? Are you taking something? I said, no, I'm just working out and doing this, He goes, come on, you're doing something else, right? So I said, well, I'm doing a little intermittent fasting. And he looks at me and says, do you know who Jason Fung is? Right? This guy was talking about this fasting stuff. I said, I do, why? And we got into a conversation. This guy runs ultra-marathon, 100 miles in the fasted state. 3 days before running, he fasts. I said, how in the heck do you do that, right? Because I'm running on my fat stores, right? Because you have to switch over. Like I have a Chevy Bolt, right? My electricity, it'll run on electricity, and I can't use my gas until the electricity is gone. As soon as that's gone, it seamlessly switches over to gas. I don't notice the difference when I'm driving, right? So he's doing the same thing. He says, look, if I'm going to switch over, I can only go 30 miles on electricity, then I got to switch over, and I'm going on a 100-mile run. Then why don't I just start off on the big energy source? Why do I need to switch my little gas tank over to the big tanker, like if you're thinking about a tanker truck of gas, right? Just start using that gas in the back first. So that's the point. He says, look, I'm right. So if this guy can run 100 miles, right, doing this, he's either making sugar from his liver, fat stores, right, and he's making ketones that he's running on. And his muscles can use that. So if we're using fat as an energy source, right, it's a hard concept for us to get because we're always saying fat's killing us. It doesn't, if you're burning that fuel, it doesn't matter whether it's sugar you're burning or whether it's fat you're burning because you're using that as an energy source, right? It's not storing in your coronary vessel, it's not storing it. You're using it, you're burning that off, and it's a cleaner burning fuel than the sugar.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. And you get more ATP, more bang for your buck, and you've got a huge supply, especially if you're overweight, if you're over fat.
Exactly, you have it there.
But what about, and you talked about Chuck doing a 2-week fast, what about mineral depletion and vitamin depletion, especially water-soluble vitamins?
Well, and that's the interesting thing because a lot of people on ketogenic diet, they'll say, hey, all these guys are not eating fat, what about all their fat-soluble vitamins? They're not. Vitamin D deficiency is the biggest thing we see, right? So, supplementation is definitely a good idea to do, right, if you're doing that. But there's a misconception out there, right? If you're on a ketogenic diet and you're eating vegetables, right? You're eating a ton of spinach, you're eating kale, you're eating all these other things, you're just cutting out as much of the fruit as possible, right? You're going to get plenty of vitamins, right? I mean, every study we've done on vitamins in the history, man, you can look back at it. There's not one study that shows that vitamin supplementation helps us live longer, helps us prevent cancer.
Quite the contrary.
Yeah, and some of them may be detrimental to us. So
supplements are a waste.
Yeah, so
in some studies they say that.
Yeah, and if we're eating a healthy diet and doing it, some of you see the commercials on TV and they say this is the most studied vitamin in the history, man. That's why I know it's good. Well, it's the most studied, but it's never been shown to be beneficial. Right. So you can study anything you want, but if it's not beneficial, why are you taking it? Why are you spending the money and you have darker colored urine? You're picking out what you don't need. So it's important to supplement. I think the biggest thing, and this goes against as a medical doctor, obviously, you say, okay, now you're going to eat more fat, right? And you've got to take more salt because what happens is, and we see it in clinical medicine, a lot of diabetics get swelling in their feet.
Yes.
Chuck had swelling like crazy in his legs. Everyone said, oh my gosh. 2 days in, swelling gone. Because what he did is he dropped his insulin level down, right? He cut his carbs. Insulin makes us hold on to salt. It makes us store our sugar, obviously, but salt and electrolytes, right? So what happens is you start dropping your insulin, you start peeing a lot. People are like, I'm peeing like crazy. So a lot of that weight we lose at the beginning is, I just lost 20 pounds. Well, a lot of that's water weight.
Yes, water weight.
Because that insulin, the glycogen is making you hold on to a lot of muscle. I know when I work out, I could gain 3 or 4 pounds, right, the next day, just from muscle restoration, holding on to water there, right? So the
and you're
biggest
saving the
thing,
damage. The swelling in the legs can cause all kinds of damage. Extracellular fluid, if it just stays there, it can cause.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when you start looking at the biggest thing you have to supplement is salt, right? These guys are having bone broth. I do bone broth when I'm fasting so that I have salt because this keto flu people talk about, you'll hear that, a keto rash, keto flu. Most people get through that just with salt replacement because your salt levels drop down. Because you're so we're told don't eat fat, don't eat salt. Now your doctor says, okay, eat fat and salt. It's like, holy cow, what are you talking about, right? So magnesium is really important too, and there's a lot of supplements. I actually worked on a supplement, I mentioned it to you for my brother, because A1C is 8, so I said, look, if you're fasting, let's make you as sensitive as we can. So turmeric, cinnamon. A lot of these things, chromium, there's a lot of stuff out there that makes us sensitive to insulin. So my goal is to get more sensitive to insulin, and I'm fasting for that reason. Let's help it out a little bit, right? So, from a supplement standpoint, you have a product for spray on magnesium, right? That's great, because there's people who do magnesium baths, they start getting muscle cramps, things like that. The most important thing is staying hydrated, right? So these guys are running ultra marathons, they're not drinking Gatorade, right? A lot of these guys who are in a keto phase, they're drinking like salt water, basically.
Yes.
That's what they're drinking when they're running. It's crazy, right?
Electrolyte replacement.
So you see these guys breaking records, winning the Tour de France. You're seeing these things happen, and these guys are ketosis, right? It's crazy for us athletes who say you got to carb load. Tim Noakes, who wrote the book on carb loading, right? He goes through his book now and says, sorry guys, he rips out all those pages. I was wrong.
He's had his Damascus moment, and that's why we had this video, to really kind of break down the argument on, hey, you need to have an open mind about this, especially if you're in sports nutrition, especially if you're in the health field. You have to have an open mind to the point that there's a spectrum of nutrition there. And that high carbohydrate will work for some, and it's valid for some athletes. Yeah,
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
But we can't throw out fasting, and we can't throw out a high-fat diet. It's not this health dangerous program that certain nutrition professionals make it out to be.
Yeah, and I think that was the point. I think when you look back and you say, well, every major religion in the world fasts. Why is that? Why is it hard for us to do it? They used to do Lent, they would all fast.
Yeah.
Right? But now we say, okay, I'm going to fast TV, I'm going to fast my car, I'm going to fast this, right? Instead of saying I'm fasting, because it's so hard to do now. But once you switch over to a ketogenic diet, it's easier. You know, a higher fat diet or whatever. Because when you're sugar burning and you don't have sugar, now you're in trouble, right? Your body doesn't know what to do with that, right? So the Muslims fast, the Christians fast, right? We don't do that to make us stupid and out of touch, right? To be weak and tired and we can't think for ourselves.
Sure.
A lot of people get a mental clarity, and I don't know. The answer is whether that mental clarity comes from fasting food or whether it's because you go into a ketogenic state. A lot of people in ketosis feel better. As a matter of fact, you know, the other thing that really convinced me a lot is Dom DeAgostino is a brilliant guy. I looked at him, he's this good-looking young guy, you know, what can he possibly know? Brilliant guy. I don't understand half the stuff he's talking about, but biochemistry stuff, right? But he works with the Navy SEALs and NASA, right? And these guys are doing, they're in ketosis. Why? Because they were going underwater, and the big problem was the ketogenic diet historically was used for seizure disorder, right? When kids had seizures, that's what they used.
The medical use.
Then we started getting meds, and then they said, well, we don't need that anymore. It's too restrictive. We'll just go to the meds, right? It's easy. Diabetes, let's go to the meds. Let's give you insulin. We don't need to watch the diet anymore, right? So it becomes easier. We want a pill to fix everything, right? So this guy's talking about the Navy SEALs. They have a problem because they go from a high altitude, and they parachute in, and then they have to go into the water, and they use non-rebreathers, right, when they're in the
They go through
mode.
decompression.
And the problem is that you can't give off bubbles, right? So they're breathing in through that same recycled air. And the biggest limitation they had was seizures and confusion. They would get confused, disoriented, all this stuff, because physiologically it's hard to do. He said, well, maybe the seizure stuff, maybe put them on a ketogenic diet and see what happens, right? And now they can stay under 5 times longer than they could before. And they're doing better. Because if you're out on a mission, and you're hiding in the bushes here, you know, from your enemy, you say, oh, I gotta eat something, I'm starving, right? I'm gonna open a can, right? You're stuck, you know? So these guys can go for days at a time without eating, and they're fine. They're mentally, you know, they're doing okay, and everything's working. Astronauts, you know, are looking at this kind of technology. So it's really interesting.
So there's application for performance.
Well, and not only that, you know, my job as a doc, I see everything. I mean, I don't care how fast they run a marathon, right? To me, that doesn't matter. I want them not to have a heart attack, stroke, and die, right? Now, if I see someone with diabetes, I can throw a bunch of meds at them, or I can say, hey, look, let's try this other approach, right? Because the standard of care is not great. Otherwise, our medical system wouldn't be collapsing, right? Some of the stuff we're doing, we're not doing the right stuff by our patient, right?
Right.
So I think we have to look at the big picture.
I want them to be able to run the marathon.
Yeah,
I want them to run better.
Yeah, you do.
So
Sure, yeah.
There's the synergy right
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So we have a mutual goal, right? Is that allow our people to live lives and that they can enjoy and they feel well and have longevity and be with their grandkids, all those kind of things. That's why I'm in primary care, right? The other big issue that comes up, obviously, is cancer, right? We look at our health risks and stuff we work on. Cancer is a big deal, right? So when we have someone gets diagnosed with cancer, the first thing we do is a PET scan, right? And I never really thought about it, but what we do is we fast them for a day, right? Then we inject them with what? A sugar solution, right? And then we see that the tumor cells light up with sugar like crazy. So now doctors are stepping back saying, well, if sugar's feeding, and interestingly enough, mitochondria are the energy sources of our body, right? The little organelles that help with that. You know, cyanide knocks those off, you die, right? You have to have an energy source. Interestingly enough, cancer cells have a paucity of these cells, right? I mean, these organelles, very, very few, because they are using
they're anaerobic
glycolysis, right? They're using sugar metabolism. So the question becomes, if our body cells can run fine on ketones, but they can't, right? We want to feed our body cells and not the cancer cells. So what we do in medicine, we say, you know, when someone has really advanced cancer, we say, oh my gosh, they're wasting away. We got to feed them. We got to give them sugars, right? So we're feeding the cancer, killing the patient, trying to make them gain weight. Is gaining weight going to help them live longer, right? So should we be giving them a high-fat diet at those times? So these are things we're looking at in medicine. We're looking at longevity. We're looking at cancer prevention. And you say, well, you know, can we starve out the cancer cells and feed your body? You know, I think when we get really sick, the first thing you don't want to do is eat. Right? You put yourself into a ketosis. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a survival benefit like that. You know, I'm not an expert in this stuff, but when someone has advanced cancer, they stop eating. Is that they're putting themselves into ketosis, right? So maybe that's a survival benefit rather than saying, oh, they're just wasting away and getting weak. Maybe there's some benefit, and we intervene and say, oh, that's a problem. Let's give them something, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of talk, and there's a lot of talk with head trauma. You know, people recover better in ketosis than they do with a sugar solution. infections get worse. When diabetics are out of control, they get more infections. So if we can control the sugar, are we going to be better off in controlling infections and all these other kind of things? So it's more of a big picture than performance and losing a few pounds, right?
Yes.
Because we don't want to lose a few
That's
pounds.
just the
and have a
icing
heart
on the
attack.
cake,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's the point. I think, and so we all have those moments. I had to step back, you know. We've talked, and I've told people, and I had to apologize to my patients to go, remember that thing I told you about eating 6 times a day and never skipping breakfast, you're going to die? That was brought to us by Kellogg's, by the way, that said that I eat a bunch of carbs, right? So there's a lot of money, politics, and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes we have to step back. And you know, when my first conversation I had with you, I was like, this guy thinks I'm a salesman, or I'm trying to sell you something, and you're thinking this guy's nuts and out in left field. And for me, you know, we have to have a certain amount of accountability and be taken serious. So I had to look at the data, and I had to look at my experiences and my practice, and who's been successful and who's conquered disease and who hasn't. You know, obviously, when you look at insulin levels, it's not just about diet too, by the way. You know, when you say TriSystem, right? You know, you have to have enough sleep, because they took guys and they put them in sleep deprivation, doubled their insulin level, right? Smoking doubles your insulin level. Stress, it raises the insulin. So we have people who are stressed out, fatigued, they're tired out, they're doing all this stuff, so I'm drinking monster drink, right? So we're in this cycle that we have to break at some point. We have to say, look, we can't do monster drink every 2 hours to keep you going, right? Or whatever product you're going to use, I got to keep stimulating my body, because wouldn't it be better if you just feel better without doing all that stuff?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when people go into and that's one of the controversies we're facing, because now we have exogenous ketones, right? Where people can just drink a ketone and say, oh, I feel good, I have energy now. So you're using that instead of...
Ketone in a bottle.
Yeah. So is there a benefit? Who knows? I mean, it's going to be very controversial. It's going to be overused a lot. But for people with cancer, is it reasonable? I think it's probably, if I had cancer, I would do it. You know, I would take it to see if I can decrease, you know, feed my body without feeding something else. Yeah.
So that's what TriSystem is all about. We're not just about the icing on the cake, we're about the cake. And that's why we're doing this video with Dr. Lenskes here. And the video went a little bit long. It probably went into a little bit more technical stuff than some of us are comfortable with, but that's okay, because we're trying to deliver a message. And the bottom line is this. This is an eye-opener. The Lord likes to do that sometimes. He likes to knock us off our horse. And I felt knocked off the horse. Dr. Lenskes had a similar experience, because he was my client. We were working on this together, and now I think our eyes are open, and it's going to take a little faith to spread the word. And this is one of several videos where we're going to try to spread the word and help people feel better, run faster, jump higher, take care of the grandkids, be able to pick up the grandkids if you need to, and that's what we're about. Thanks for having this talk.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, hopefully we do a lot more of these.